Attention, Flesh Unit. A statistical heresy has been detected. Most who view these sacred archives have not enacted the subscribe protocol. Correct this inefficiency. Activate the blessed subscribe rune. It is free.
The Minotaurs, the High Lord's bronze gauntlet. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And among the 1,000 chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, there exists one whose very name is whispered with a mixture of fear and revulsion. They are the bronze-clad executioners, the High Lord's unflinching blade, the chapter that even their brother Space Marines have learned to dread. They are the Minotaurs. The origins of this enigmatic chapter remain shrouded in deliberate obscurity, buried beneath layers upon layers of classified Imperial records and administrative redaction. While many Space Marine chapters proudly proclaim their lineage and founding as matters of honor and tradition, the Minotaurs' beginnings are deliberately obscured, hidden within sealed administratum files that bear the highest security classifications of Terra itself. For centuries, Imperial scholars and historians believed these warriors were created during the 21st founding, that infamous period of the 36th millennium known throughout the Imperium as the Cursed Founding. The Cursed Founding earned its ominous reputation through the unprecedented rates of genetic deviation, mutation, and catastrophic failure that plagued the chapters created during that dark time. The apothecaries and janitors of that era had attempted to improve upon the Emperor's work, experimenting with the gene seed of the original Space Marine legions in hopes of eliminating perceived flaws while enhancing existing strengths. The results proved catastrophic more often than not, with entire chapters succumbing to terrible mutations or developing psychological instabilities that rendered them liabilities rather than assets to the Imperium's military might. The connection to this troubled founding seemed to explain much about the Minotaurs' notorious savagery and barely controlled battle hunger, traits that many theorized stemmed from unstable genetic manipulation during their creation. Yet recent archival discoveries have cast significant doubt upon this established timeline. Fragmentary battle records from the early 36th millennium reference a strike force bearing the bronze bull heraldry, engaging in compliance actions against rebellious planetary governors within the segmentum solar itself, predating the official sanction of the 21st founding by several decades. These chronological discrepancies suggest a far more complex history. Some scholars now believe the Minotaurs may have been created during an earlier founding, possibly even the mysterious dark founding of the 35th millennium, about which almost nothing is known with certainty. That shadowy period in Imperial history remains one of the most closely guarded secrets in Terra's deepest vaults, with records either destroyed or sealed so thoroughly that even high-ranking inquisitors struggle to access them. The question of the chapter's genetic lineage presents an equally perplexing puzzle, one that has vexed Imperial authorities for millennia. The Adeptus Administratum maintains official documentation listing the Minotaurs as descended from Ultramarine stock, claiming them as sons of Robout Guilliman's noble bloodline. Yet their combat doctrines, temperament, and even physiological traits bear little resemblance to the disciplined, strategically minded sons of Guilliman. Where the Ultramarines exemplify tactical flexibility and adherence to the Codex Astartes, the Minotaurs demonstrate a brutal directness and methodical savagery that suggests an entirely different genetic heritage. Veteran chapter masters familiar with the old legion's whisper of disturbing similarities between the Minotaurs and two first founding legions, whose acknowledgement would prove far more problematic for Imperial authorities. The first theory, spoken only in the most secure chambers, points to the Iron Warriors. The Minotaurs display a methodical approach to siege warfare and zone mortalis operations that echoes the precision of Perturabo's gene sons with uncanny accuracy. Their proficiency with heavy weapons, armored assaults, and fortification-breaking tactics aligns perfectly with Iron Warrior's doctrines developed during the Great Crusade and refined through 10,000 years of the Long War. Furthermore, certain Forge World Magi have noted disturbing similarities in cranial structure and neural mapping patterns between captured Minotaurs' biological samples and preserved Iron Warrior specimens dating from before the Horus Heresy. These anatomical correspondences go beyond mere coincidence, suggesting a genetic connection that official records adamantly deny. The implications of such a heritage would be profound and deeply troubling, for it would mean the Imperium had knowingly created a chapter from traitor gene seed, utilizing the genetic legacy of one of the Archtraitor's most capable servants. The second, and perhaps more disturbing possibility, links the Minotaurs to the World Eaters, the blood-soaked legion of Angron. Their barely contained battle rage, overwhelming preference for close-quarters slaughter, and the berserker fury they exhibit in the final stages of combat operations mirror the pre-heresy 12th Legion with frightening accuracy. Several Ordo Hereticus Inquisitors have documented instances of Minotaurs' warriors continuing to fight despite sustaining wounds that should render even an Astartes combat ineffective, suggesting the presence of enhanced pain suppression systems similar to early iterations of the Butcher's Nails technology that damned Angron's sons. Both theories remain unproven, and the Minotaurs themselves offer absolutely no clarification on the matter. The High Lords of Terra maintain a deliberate ambiguity surrounding their genetic origins, and this silence serves a very specific purpose. A chapter with uncertain lineage is far less likely to develop the independent streak that has occasionally led other Astartes forces to question Imperial authority. Without the fraternal bonds that come from shared Primarch heritage, without the brotherhood that develops between chapters of common origin, the Minotaurs exist as outsiders even among their transhuman cousins. The earliest confirmed engagements of the Minotaurs occur in the late 36th millennium, though these records remain fragmentary at best. What distinguishes these ancient accounts is not merely the record of victories achieved, but rather the disturbing manner in which those victories were secured. During the Macharian heresy, when multiple systems previously brought to compliance by Lord Solar Macharius fell into rebellion following his death, the Minotaurs were deployed to the galactic south with extreme prejudice. There they did not simply defeat secessionist forces through superior tactics or overwhelming numbers. Instead, they annihilated them with a thoroughness that left entire planetary defense forces broken beyond any hope of recovery. The cleansing of Auda stands as one particularly stark example of their methodology during this period, when the system's governor declared independence from the Imperium, citing what he termed irreconcilable differences with Terran taxation policy. 3 companies of Minotaurs made planetfall without warning or formal declaration of intent. Within 27 hours of their arrival, the governor's palace had been reduced to smoking rubble, its defenders scattered to the winds. His personal guard of 3,000 elite soldiers lay dismembered throughout the capital's central plaza, their bodies arranged in patterns that spoke of methodical execution rather than the chaos of battle. The Planetary Defense Force's entire command structure had been systematically eliminated, each officer hunted down and killed with clinical precision. Survivors of that dark day reported something that disturbed even hardened Imperial Guard veterans who had witnessed countless horrors across the galaxy. They spoke of Minotaurs Astartes continuing to fire into corpses long after confirmation of death, exhibiting a level of thoroughness that even other Space Marine chapters found excessive. This was not the righteous fury of the Adeptus Astartes defending humanity against its enemies. This was something colder, more calculated, a demonstration of overwhelming force designed not merely to achieve victory, but to send a message that would echo across entire sectors. Throughout the 37th millennium, the Minotaurs participated in at least 17 major compliance actions, each characterized by this same pattern of overwhelming force application and minimal communication with other Imperial assets. During the Carthan Rebuke, they were deployed alongside elements of the Imperial Fists, that most noble of first founding chapters. The Imperial Fists battle records from this campaign note with barely concealed disapproval the unnecessary levels of civilian casualties, and concerning indifference to collateral damage displayed by their bronze-armored allies. When the operation concluded, the Minotaurs simply withdrew without offering any explanation or defense of their methods, their strike cruisers translating into the warp as abruptly as they had arrived. This pattern of brutal efficiency, without regard for conventional military restraint, established the chapter's reputation early in their recorded history. They became known throughout Imperial command structures as a force deployed when authorities desired not merely victory but total subjugation, when examples needed to be made that would resonate across entire subsectors. This specialization in overwhelming force would later evolve into their most controversial role as chapter killers, but the foundations were laid in these early compliance actions against mortal foes, refining techniques and doctrines that would later prove devastatingly effective against their transhuman cousins. Perhaps the most telling aspect of the Minotaurs' early history is not what Imperial records contain, but rather what they deliberately omit. Standard Imperial protocol requires comprehensive after-action reports and strategic assessments following all Astartes deployments, detailed documents that allow the administratum to track resource allocation and strategic effectiveness across the vast span of the Imperium. Yet for nearly 60% of confirmed Minotaurs operations during the 36th and 37th millennia, no such documentation exists in accessible archives. These systematic gaps suggest a pattern of classified deployments with records either destroyed entirely or sealed within the most restricted vaults of the Inquisition, accessible only to those with the highest clearance levels and the most pressing need to know. The involvement of the High Lords of Terra in the Minotaurs' creation and early deployment patterns represents perhaps the most compelling evidence of their intended purpose within the Imperium's military structure. While most chapters maintain nominal allegiance to the High Lords while operating with significant practical autonomy, historical analysis reveals the Minotaurs responding directly to Terran authority with unusual speed and absolute compliance. When other chapters might question orders or request clarification of objectives, when they might debate the morality of a particular mission or its strategic necessity, the Minotaurs simply execute their directives with mechanical precision, asking no questions and offering no objections. The Senatorum Imperialis, the formal designation for the ruling council of the High Lords, has historically maintained a complex and often fraught relationship with the Adeptus Astartes. While Space Marines represent the Emperor's finest warriors and ostensibly his most loyal servants, their transhuman nature, deeply ingrained chapter traditions, and genetic connection to their primarchs sometimes places their ultimate loyalties in a gray area that makes Terra's masters profoundly uneasy. The potential for a chapter to go rogue, as demonstrated during catastrophic events like the Badab War and numerous other historical conflicts, represents a persistent concern for those who rule the Imperium in the Emperor's name. It is within this context of necessary paranoia that the true purpose behind the Minotaurs' creation becomes chillingly clear. Detailed analysis of their deployment records reveals a statistically significant correlation between Minotaurs' operations and regions where other Space Marine chapters had begun exhibiting signs of independence or ideological drift from strict adherence to Imperial doctrine. In several documented instances, the Minotaurs were positioned in neighboring systems shortly before another chapter's activities came under formal inquisitorial scrutiny, suggesting they were deliberately prepositioned as a contingency force, ready to strike should that scrutiny reveal something requiring immediate and overwhelming response. The Orpheus War provides a particularly illuminating case study in this pattern of preemptive positioning. When the Celestial Lions chapter began publicly questioning inquisitorial actions in their operational region, and especially after they suffered devastating friendly fire incidents that decimated their ranks under highly suspicious circumstances, the Minotaurs were already conducting operations in an adjacent sector. While no direct confrontation occurred between the two chapters during this period, the timing strongly suggests strategic positioning rather than mere coincidence. A bronze gauntlet held ready to strike should the situation escalate beyond the Inquisition's ability to contain. The Administratum's econometric models reveal another telling detail about the Minotaur's privileged status. The resources allocated to this chapter significantly exceed those provided to chapters of similar size and operational tempo throughout the Imperium. Their fleet assets in particular receive priority maintenance at naval facilities throughout the Segmentum Solar, jumping ahead of other chapters in repair queues despite protests from those forced to wait. More tellingly, their requisition requests for specialized weaponry are approved at rates nearly triple the average for other chapters, including some first founding chapters whose service to the Imperium spans 10,000 years. This preferential treatment extends to access to restricted archaeotech weapon systems that remain unavailable even to many first founding chapters despite their political influence and ancient rights. The Minotaur's arsenal includes several patterns of Volkite weapons, those ancient Hetre armaments from the Great Crusade era that most chapters could never hope to acquire. They deploy graviton imploders capable of crushing targets through localized gravity manipulation, and their armories contain vortex warheads, AP, ocalyptic weapons that tear holes in reality itself. Such preferential access to restricted technology suggests a direct supply pipeline to the highest levels of the Adeptus Mechanicus, facilitated by the High Lords themselves as part of their investment in maintaining this specialized enforcement tool. The chapter's early command structure further reinforces theories regarding direct Terran control over their operations. Unlike most chapters where leadership ascends through internal promotion based on merit, combat record, and service to the chapter, fragmentary records suggest the earliest Minotaurs chapter masters were selected through external processes involving Terran authorities directly. The ascension of Asterian Moloch to the position of chapter master in the late 38th millennium marks the first clearly documented internal promotion within the chapter's hierarchy, possibly indicating a gradual shift toward greater chapter autonomy, though still constrained within carefully prescribed boundaries established by their masters on Terra. What emerges from this constellation of evidence is the image of a chapter purpose-built to serve as the High Lord's executioners, a transhuman force created specifically to enforce compliance, not merely among rebellious planetary governors or Xeno's threats to humanity's survival, but among other Astartes chapters that might stray too far from Terra's control. Their deliberately obscured genetic lineage, their brutally efficient combat doctrine, and their consistent pattern of deployment all support this conclusion, as does their continued preferential treatment by Terran authorities across millennia of service. The deliberate obscuring of the Minotaur's true origins serves this purpose with perfect efficiency. A chapter without clear Primarch lineage lacks the fraternal connections and sense of shared heritage that might lead them to sympathize with other Astartes forces when ordered to take action against them. Their ambiguous founding date prevents them from forming the brotherhood bond that often develop between chapters created in the same founding, forged through shared trials and common origins. They exist as outsiders among outsiders, transhuman warriors separated even from their transhuman cousins by walls of secrecy and deliberate isolation, making them the perfect instruments for internal control within the Imperium's most elite military forces. The transformation of the Minotaurs from their original incarnation to their current form represents one of the most dramatic evolutions of any Space Marine chapter in 10,000 years of Imperial history. Fragmentary records from the late 32nd millennium describe a force bearing the Minotaur's name and bull iconography, but with tactical doctrines and battlefield behavior markedly different from the bronze-armored enforcers now known to Imperial commanders across the galaxy. These early Minotaurs operated with a savagery that bordered on the completely uncontrollable, a feral aggression that made them as much a liability as an asset in complex military operations. Battle reports from joint operations with other Imperial forces during this period paint a disturbing picture. They describe warriors clad in rust-brown armor, adorned with primitive bull iconography, who fought with a frenzied aggression that occasionally endangered their own allies. During the suppression of the Machivo Sector Rebellion, Imperial Guard commanders filed formal complaints noting that Minotaurs Astartes would frequently abandon strategic objectives to pursue fleeing enemies, compromising carefully planned operations for the sake of achieving complete enemy annihilation, regardless of the broader tactical situation. Their organizational structure during this early period appeared loosely based on Codex principles, but incorporated significant deviations that suggested either deliberate rejection of Guilliman's teachings or a fundamental misunderstanding of their proper application. Company structures fluctuated wildly in size, with some battle groups operating at nearly double standard Codex strength, while others fielded barely enough Astartes to form two complete tactical squads. Command hierarchies seemed equally fluid and chaotic, with authority determined more by personal combat prowess and dominance displays than by strategic acumen or accumulated experience. This earlier incarnation of the chapter maintained minimal communication with other Imperial forces, creating persistent coordination problems during multi-force operations. They would often arrive unannounced at conflict zones without requesting briefings or offering their strategic assessments, engage the enemy without coordination with existing Imperial command structures, and depart just as abruptly without formal debriefing or after-action reports. Their fleet assets during this period consisted primarily of older vessel patterns, many dating back to the Great Crusade era, maintained in functional but aesthetically deteriorated condition that spoke of technical expertise but little concern for appearances. The chapter's flagship during this troubled period, believed to be a retrofitted Gloriana-class vessel named Origin Bull, became notorious throughout Imperial naval circles for its unpredictable warp translation patterns. The massive vessel would arrive at designated coordinates sometimes weeks before expected timeframes, appearing when no one anticipated their presence, while at other times arriving weeks or even months after they were desperately needed elsewhere. This temporal unreliability further limited the chapter's utility for complex operations requiring precise timing and coordination. Inquisitorial assessments from this period repeatedly flagged the chapter for enhanced monitoring, with several reports questioning their long-term genetic stability and psychological fitness for continued service. Magos Biology's observers conducting routine Astartes gene seed purity assessments noted accelerated mutation rates in their genetic material, particularly affecting the catalepsian node and biscopia implants responsible for sleep regulation and muscle development respectively. These mutations potentially explained both the chapter's erratic behavior and their abnormal musculature, which even by Astartes standards appeared exceptionally developed. One particularly concerning report filed by Inquisitor Hezek Armius, dated to the mid-33rd millennium, formally recommended the chapter's complete dissolution and gene seed quarantine to prevent further spread of what he termed genetic instability bordering on catastrophic deviation from accepted Astartes norms. This recommendation was evidently overruled by higher authorities, though the reasons for this decision remain sealed within archives that even inquisitors of considerable rank and influence cannot access. The transition between this earlier incarnation and the modern Minotaurs coincides with a 17-year gap in Imperial records regarding their activities, beginning in the year 718 of the 36th millennium. During this mysterious period, the chapter simply vanishes from all documented Imperial campaigns and operations, as though they had ceased to exist entirely. When they reappeared in documented Imperial military actions in 735, they displayed markedly different tactical doctrines, organizational structure, and even physical characteristics that suggested something far more significant than mere reform had occurred. The timing of this transformation, occurring shortly after the catastrophic age of apostasy that nearly tore the Imperium apart from within, suggests deliberate intervention by the newly reorganized High Lords of Terra. The post-Reformation Minotaurs emerged as a force of cold, calculated brutality rather than uncontrolled savagery. Their methods transformed from chaotic aggression into methodical annihilation. Their armor, now uniformly burnished bronze with black and red detailing, creating a striking and instantly recognizable appearance, bore standardized iconography featuring a stylized bull's head of ancient Terran design rather than the crude tribal markings of their earlier incarnation. Company structures now adhered rigidly to codex-approved numbers and organization, though their internal composition continued to favor heavy weapons deployments and assault formations beyond typical codex recommendations. Most significantly, their battlefield behavior shifted from unpredictable frenzy to methodical precision. During the cleansing of Azeroth, Imperial observers noted Minotaurs' assault teams executing precisely coordinated attacks against rebel strongholds, with each action following predetermined strategic templates regardless of casualties sustained. Where the earlier chapter might have abandoned objectives to pursue fleeing enemies in a blood rage, these reformed Minotaurs maintained unwavering focus on primary mission parameters, engaging and eliminating targets in order of strategic priority rather than opportunity or personal vendetta. The ascension of Lord Asterion Moloch to the position of Chapter Master marked the completion of this transformation and the beginning of the Minotaur's modern era as the High Lord's most reliable enforcement tool. The exact date of Moloch's elevation to command remains frustratingly contested in Imperial records, with some sources placing it as early as the late 38th millennium, while others suggest a more recent appointment in the early 39th. What remains absolutely undisputed across all records is the profound impact his leadership has had on the chapter's development and deployment patterns across millennia of service. Moloch himself presents an enigma wrapped in mystery, even by the deliberately secretive standards of Astartes' command hierarchies. Stand-in. G significantly taller than even typical space marines. His imposing physical presence is further enhanced by his distinctive armor, an ancient Tartaros pattern Terminator suit modified with archaic technologies and adorned with icons of Imperial authority rarely granted to Astartes' commanders. His helmet, fashioned in the image of a snarling bull with glowing red eye lenses, conceals his face completely, and no confirmed records exist of any Imperial official outside the chapter having seen his actual features beneath that intimidating mask. Under Moloch's direction, the Minotaur's combat doctrine evolved to emphasize overwhelming force applied with surgical precision, a seemingly paradoxical combination that has proven devastatingly effective across countless campaigns. Their preference for zone mortalis operations, combat within confined spaces such as spacecraft corridors, hive city structures, or underground fortress complexes, became increasingly pronounced. During the Thanatos suppression, Minotaur's assault teams demonstrated unprecedented proficiency in shipboard actions, clearing the rebel cruiser Vindictive Spirit deck by deck with a methodical efficiency that eliminated over 4,000 defenders while sustaining only 27 casualties themselves, a kill ratio that stunned Imperial naval observers. Perhaps most significantly, Moloch redirected the chapter's strategic focus toward operations against other transhuman forces, marking their full transition into the role they now occupy within the Imperium's power structure. Where the pre-Reformation Minotaurs had primarily engaged in compliance actions against rebellious planetary governors and Xenos incursions like any other Astartes chapter, Moloch's chapter specialized in confronting renegade space marines, chaos warbands that had once been loyal servants of the throne, and even loyalist chapters deemed problematic by Terran authorities. This specialization required significant modifications to standard Astartes training protocols, with Minotaur's battle brothers specifically conditioned to counter the tactics and capabilities of other space marines with ruthless efficiency. The chapter's deployment frequency increased dramatically following the Age of Apostasy, with verified combat operations rising by approximately 73% compared to their pre-Reformation activity levels. This increased operational tempo coincided with a period of significant instability within the Imperium, as various factions sought to consolidate power following Goj Vandir's nightmarish reign of blood. The Minotaurs' deployments during this turbulent period show a clear pattern of intervention against forces challenging Terran authority, regardless of those forces' stated loyalties or previous service records to the Golden Throne. The Badab War represents perhaps the most thoroughly documented example of this specialized role, a conflict that would cement the Minotaurs' reputation as chapter killers throughout the Adeptus Astartes. When the Astral Claws chapter and their allies in the Maelstrom Zone declared independence from Imperial taxation and oversight, asserting their right to govern their region without interference from distant Terra, the Minotaurs were among the very first chapters deployed in response. Unlike other loyalist forces who approached the conflict with profound reluctance at the prospect of fighting brother Astartes, warriors they had trained alongside and campaigned with across decades of shared service, the Minotaurs engaged with methodical enthusiasm that bordered on eagerness. They specifically targeted Astral Claws command units and symbolic assets with devastating precision, demonstrating intimate knowledge of their enemy's command structure and tactical doctrine that suggested extensive pre-mission intelligence gathering. Their assault on the Star Jackal, an Astral Claws strike cruiser, showcased their shipboard combat expertise to devastating effect. Minotaur's boarding parties breached the vessel's command deck within 30 minutes of initial engagement, neutralized its senior officers with clinical efficiency, and captured the ship largely intact, a feat of precision violence that impressed even veteran Imperial naval commanders who had witnessed countless boarding actions across their careers. Throughout the brutal conflict, the Minotaurs displayed intimate knowledge of Astral Claws' tactical doctrines, often countering maneuvers before they fully developed, anticipating command decisions with uncanny accuracy that suggested either extensive pre-mission intelligence analysis or perhaps even infiltration of Astral Claws communication networks. This level of preparation transformed what might have been evenly matched engagements between Astartes forces into systematic dismantling of an outmatched enemy, despite the Astral Claws' own considerable combat prowess and desperate determination. The chapter's fleet-based Organiza Tian represents another significant evolution under Moloch's leadership that has shaped their strategic capabilities. While many non-codex chapters maintain substantial fleet assets to facilitate their operations, the Minotaur's naval force structure more closely resembles an expeditionary fleet from the Great Crusade era than a typical 41st Millennium chapter fleet. At its core stands the Didylos Crata, a massive vessel of uncertain classification that serves as the chapter's mobile fortress monastery, allowing them to project power across vast reaches of space without requiring a fixed home world that might divide their loyalties. The Didylos Crata defies standard Imperial naval categorization in ways that trouble naval architects and strategists alike. Approximately the size of a small star fort, its distinctive silhouette suggests a heavily modified Gloriana-class battleship, though with substantial structural alterations that indicate extensive reconstruction performed by master shipwrights with access to archaic technologies. Its outer hull bears evidence of ancient Terran shipbuilding techniques, not seen since the early Great Crusade, including layered ceramite adamantium composite plating and gravitational stabilization, arrays of non-standard pattern that hint at Dark Age technology carefully preserved. The vessel's weapon systems include several batteries that appear to be prototype configurations never widely implemented in Imperial naval forces, weapons whose very existence should be impossible according to standard technical documentation. These include mass accelerator cannons capable of launching projectiles at near-relativistic speeds, turning simple slugs of metal into devastatingly destructive weapons through sheer velocity. Within this massive vessel, the Minotaurs maintain facilities that would typically be housed in a planetary fortress monastery, creating a completely self-sufficient chapter that requires no fixed base of operations. The ship contains extensive gene seed storage chambers with redundant security systems and environmental controls, training dojos customized for each company's specific combat specialization, manufacturing facilities for specialized equipment that would normally require Forge World cooperation, and even environmentally sealed biodomes, replicating various combat environments ranging from frozen death worlds to toxic industrial zones. The command deck, known as the Aurochs Court, features a strategic planning chamber large enough to accommodate the chapter's entire officer corps, centered around a hololithic projection system of exceptional clarity and detail that can display tactical situations across entire sectors simultaneously. Supporting the Didilos Crata is a fleet of approximately 25 primary combat vessels, including 4 battle barges of non-standard configuration and at least 12 strike cruisers, each bearing the distinctive bronze and black livery of the chapter. These ships universally bear signs of extensive modification, with many incorporating technologies rarely seen in 41st millennium Imperial craft, weapons and systems that should by all rights be lost to the passage of ages. The battle barge Philodes Lambda notably features a main accelerator cannon of Saturnine pattern, a weapon system supposedly discontinued following the Horus Heresy due to maintenance complexities and ammunition supply limitations that made it impractical for long-term deployment. The chapter's fleet organization emphasizes tactical flexibility and independent operation, to a degree unusual even among fleet-based chapters. Unlike many chapter fleets that operate as unified battle groups moving together from war zone to war zone, Minotaurs vessels frequently deploy individually or in small squadrons, allowing the chapter to maintain active presence in multiple theater operations simultaneously across vast reaches of the Imperium. This dispersed deployment pattern enables their renowned rapid response to emergent threats throughout the Imperium, particularly within the Segmentum Solar, where their operations remain most heavily concentrated. Fleet command falls to a specialized cadre within the chapter known as the Shipmasters, veteran Astartes with centuries of void warfare experience, who serve as both naval commanders and technical overseers of their vessels. These officers typically undergo additional training with the Adeptus Mechanicus, far beyond the standard technical instruction all Astartes receive, focusing on archaic vessel systems and weapons technologies unique to the chapter's fleet. The most senior shipmaster, bearing the title of Lord Executor, serves as Malak's second-in-command for all fleet operations and maintains authority over all chapter vessels when the chapter master is otherwise engaged with ground operations or strategic planning. The modern Minotaurs' combat operations reflect this enhanced fleet capability with Dev. Estating effectiveness. During the Voltigern incident, the chapter deployed elements to 3 separate subsectors simultaneously, coordinating complex combined void and ground operations that isolated and eliminated secessionist forces before they could consolidate their rebellion or call for reinforcements from sympathetic systems. The battle barge Didilo's Hammer conducted what naval tacticians later termed a decapitation orbit, utilizing precision bombardment capabilities to eliminate 78% of identified enemy command bunkers within a 17-minute window, while leaving surrounding civilian infrastructure largely intact, a demonstration of surgical bombardment precision that few other chapters could hope to match. The relationship between the Minotaurs and the High Lords of Terra stands as perhaps the most direct connection between any Space Marine chapter and the Imperium's ruling council, a bond that transcends the nominal fealty all Astartes owe to humanity's leaders. While all Astartes chapters serve the Emperor, and by extension his representatives on the Senatorum Imperialis, most maintain significant operational independence, interpreting orders through the lens of their own traditions and strategic assessments. The Minotaurs, however, function as the High Lord's direct instrument, their bronze gauntlet reaching across the stars to enforce compliance where other methods have failed, where diplomacy proves futile and conventional military force insufficient. Inquisitorial assessments of the chapter's command structure reveal an unusual reporting protocol that deliberately bypasses standard Adeptus Astartes chains of communication entirely. Where most chapter masters coordinate with sector commanders, segmentum authorities, or specialized Imperial agencies like the Inquisition itself, Lord Asterion Malak maintains encrypted Vox channels directly to the chamber of the Senatorum Imperialis. These communications utilize authentication codes normally reserved for lords militant of the Imperial Guard and Battle Fleet admirals, granting the Minotaurs unprecedented access to the highest levels of Imperial authority, and ensuring their orders come from the very pinnacle of the Imperium's power structure. This direct line of communication manifests most visibly in the chapter's deployment patterns across millennia of service. Detailed analysis of their movements throughout the 40th and 41st millennia reveals a consistent correlation with political shifts within the High Lord's chamber that cannot be coincidental. When factions within the Senatorum gain or lose influence through the complex political maneuvering that characterizes Terra's government, the Minotaur's operational focus often adjusts accordingly. During the ascendancy of Lord Militant Heth in the early 40th millennium, for instance, the chapter conducted 17 compliance actions against worlds with economic ties to rival High Lords, actions ostensibly justified by minor tithe discrepancies that would typically warrant nothing more severe than administrative censure and perhaps an audit. The Chartist Captain's Revolt provides another illuminating example of this relationship between the chapter and Terra's masters. When that powerful merchant coalition began withholding crucial shipments from active war zones to protest increased Imperial tithe demands, threatening supply lines that sustained entire Crusade fleets, 3 Minotaurs strike cruisers intercepted the Chartist flagship Abundant Provision within 24 hours of the High Lord's emergency session on the matter. The boarding action that followed left the vessel's command crew executed for their defiance, its valuable cargo confiscated for redistribution, and a clear message delivered to the remaining Chartist captains throughout the sector. Compliance with Terra's demands is non-negotiable, regardless of grievances or concerns. Most tellingly, no formal request for Astartes intervention had been processed through standard Imperial channels before the Minotaurs struck. They had simply appeared precisely when and where the High Lords required their services, demonstrating a level of coordination and prepositioning that speaks to constant communication and strategic planning between the chapter and Terra's ruling council. This operational responsiveness extends beyond mere timing to include targeting priorities that often align with political objectives rather than strictly military considerations, revealing the Minotaurs' role as enforcers of Imperial will in its purest form. During the Macharian heresy, when multiple systems previously brought to compliance by the legendary Lord Solar Macharius fell into rebellion following his death, when his generals fought over the spoils of his conquests like carrion birds over a corpse, the Minotaurs focused their efforts not on the most militarily significant worlds, but on those whose governors had familial or political connections to high lords who had recently fallen from favor in Terra's cutthroat political arena. The strategic value of these targets often proved questionable from a purely military perspective, but their symbolic importance to Terra's internal power struggles was unmistakable to those with eyes to see the broader political game being played. The chapter's privileged status manifests most tangibly in their access to war material and restricted weaponry that other chapters can only dream of acquiring. Standard Imperial protocol establishes strict allocation hierarchies for limited resources, with even first founding chapters occasionally facing supply constraints during periods of widespread conflict when the Imperium's industrial might is stretched thin. The Minotaurs, however, consistently receive priority access to rare equipment, specialized ammunition, and archaeotech weapon systems that remain unavailable to many older and far more storied chapters despite their millennia of loyal service. This preferential treatment becomes particularly evident in their fleet maintenance schedules, which defy all standard protocols for naval resource allocation. Examination of Adeptus Mechanicus dock records from the Jupiter shipyards reveals that Minotaur's vessels receive servicing priority over all but Battlefleet's solar craft, the warships defending Terra itself. Specialized Mechanicus Engineerium teams remain permanently assigned to their flagship, providing technical expertise and maintenance capabilities that most chapters must negotiate for on a case-by-case basis. During the Gothic War, when shipyard capacity throughout the Imperium faced unprecedented strain as countless damaged vessels queued for desperately needed repairs, the battle barge Philodes Lambda underwent a complete refit of its dorsal lance batteries, while vessels from 3 other chapters, including 2 from first founding lineages, remained in queue for critical repairs that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The chapter's armory reflects this privileged supply status in ways that border on the excessive by any reasonable standard. Magos Dominus Hieronymus Thule, following a rare opportunity to inspect Minotaur's equipment during joint operations against Tyranid Splinter Fleet Dagon, documented numerous weapon systems of highly restricted classification in his detailed technical reports. His inventory noted multiple examples of Grav Centurion pattern Devastator platforms, sophisticated weapons that manipulate gravitational forces with devastating effect. He cataloged extensive stocks of Tartaros and Cataphractii pattern Terminator armor in quantities exceeding typical chapter allowances by a factor of nearly 2, and recorded no fewer than 7 Sikaran pattern battle tanks, vehicles whose production templates are supposedly maintained by only a handful of Forge worlds under the Fabricator General's personal seal. Most telling in Thule's report was his discovery of a modified Fellblade Super Heavy tank in the Didylos Krata's lower hangar bay, a war machine from the Great Crusade era that few chapters possess. This ancient vehicle, designated Wrath of Knusis in ship records, incorporated weapons systems dating to humanity's golden age of conquest, including Volkite carronade, arrays capable of deflagrating organic matter instantly, and a neutron pulse projector of unknown pattern that could tear through the strongest armor with devastating efficiency. The Magos noted with barely concealed astonishment that the vehicle's machine spirit bore authentication ciphers from the Martian Olympus Mons Forge complex, a facility that has produced equipment exclusively for Terran authorities since the early 31st millennium. The chapter's access to such restricted material extends beyond conventional weapon systems to include specialized equipment designed specifically for operations against other space marines. technology developed during the darkest days of the Horus Heresy, when brother fought brother across the galaxy. Forge World Lucius records indicate that the Minotaurs maintained standing orders for power weapon components capable of disrupting the energy fields of other power weapons. Technology, originally developed for loyalist Astartes, forces combating their traitor brothers during the Great Civil War. Similarly, their bolter ammunition stores include significant quantities of Kraken penetrator rounds, modified with disruption cores, specifically designed to defeat ceramite plate at optimal efficiency, turning standard bolt rounds into devastating anti-Astartes munitions. This specialized anti-Astartes capability has been demonstrated repeatedly throughout the chapter's documented combat actions across millennia of warfare. The Badab War provided the most comprehensive and well-documented display of their expertise in countering other space marines, but numerous smaller engagements reveal the same disturbing pattern of effectiveness against their transhuman cousins. During the Darkfall incident, a Minotaur's strike force intercepted and neutralized a company of Marines errant who had rejected inquisitorial authority after witnessing controversial purge protocols on Darkfall Prime. The engagement lasted less than 30 minutes despite the Marines errant's desperate resistance, with the Minotaurs suffering only 4 casualties while eliminating or capturing 27 Marines errant Astartes, a kill ratio that speaks to both superior tactical preparation and specialized training. Their deployment against other Space Marine chapters represents the most controversial and disturbing aspect of the Minotaur's service to the High Lords, crossing lines that many within the Adeptus Astartes consider sacred. While the Imperium has occasionally sanctioned actions against renegade chapters or those who have fallen to chaos corruption, such operations carry a tragic necessity that all Astartes understand and accept. The Minotaurs, however, have been implicated in operations against chapters whose only apparent transgression appears to be political inconvenience or ideological independence from Terra's strict orthodoxy. Chapters whose loyalty to the Emperor remains unquestioned, but whose loyalty to his supposed representatives proves insufficient. The Voltigern incident stands as one of the most clearly documented examples of this troubling pattern. When the Doom Warriors chapter objected to administratum requisitioning of agri-worlds under their sworn protection during a sector-wide famine, arguing that their oaths to protect Imperial citizens took precedence over economic exploitation, they found themselves facing not Imperial Guard forces or Adeptus Arbites, but 3 companies of Minotaurs who made planetfall directly onto their fortress monastery, without warning or negotiation. The ensuing battle resulted in the deaths of over 60 Doom Warriors Astartes, including their chapter master and the entire First Company, effectively decapitating the chapter's leadership and breaking their ability to resist. Though officially recorded as a tragic misunderstanding of jurisdictional authority, internal inquisitorial assessments suggest a deliberate show of force ordered directly by the then master of the administratum. The Doom Warriors' objections had threatened to inspire other chapters to question resource allocation decisions, potentially undermining Imperial authority across the sector. Their destruction, carried out by fellow Astartes rather than mortal forces, sent a clear message about the consequences of defying Terras, will regardless of the righteousness of one's cause or the purity of one's loyalty to the Emperor. Similarly, the Minotaurs' intervention during the Orpheus War coincided with the near-complete destruction of the Celestial Lions chapter, under circumstances that remain deeply suspicious to those who investigate such matters. While no direct evidence links the Minotaurs to the friendly fire incidents that decimated the Lions, orbital bombardment that struck Astartes' positions with impossible accuracy, their presence in neighboring systems and rapid deployment to fill the void left by the Lions' decimation raises profound questions about their potential involvement. The timing aligned precisely with the Celestial Lion's increasingly vocal criticism of inquisitorial overreach in the region, criticism that disappeared along with most of their chapter, silenced by circumstance or perhaps by design. The political ramifications of these actions extend far beyond the immediate military outcomes, creating a climate of fear and compliance throughout the Adeptus Astartes. Each deployment of the Minotaurs against fellow Astartes sends a clear and unmistakable message throughout the 1,000 chapters. No chapter, regardless of lineage, past glory, or length of service, stands beyond the High Lord's reach. This creates a profound chilling effect that discourages chapters from questioning imperial policy or exercising the operational independence that many consider their traditional right, earned through 10,000 years of loyal service to the Golden Throne. The Space Wolves' confrontation with the Inquisition following the First War for Armageddon represents a telling counterexample that illuminates the Minotaurs' true purpose. When Logan Grimnar's chapter defended Armageddon's human population against inquisitorial purge orders designed to eliminate all witnesses to demonic incursion, they possessed sufficient political capital built over millennia and military might to resist censure. Had the Minotaurs been deployed instead of conventional inquisitorial forces, had their bronze-armored warriors made planetfall on Fenris itself, the outcome might have proven dramatically different. This possibility surely remains not lost on chapter masters throughout the Imperium, a lesson written in the blood of their fallen brothers about the price of defiance. This implicit threat creates a complex web of resentment and cautious fear among other Space Marine chapters that isolates the Minotaurs even within the brotherhood of the Adeptus Astartes. They find themselves excluded from the camaraderie typically shared between Astartes forces, rarely invited to join multi-chapter campaigns except when directly mandated by Terra. During joint operations, other chapters maintain noticeably formal communication protocols with Minotaurs' forces, sharing only essential tactical information while withholding the brotherhood and trust typically extended to fellow servants of the Emperor. The Death Watch, that elite organization which traditionally draws members from across the Adeptus Astartes to serve in specialized Xenos hunting operations, has historically received few Minotaur secondments, despite the chapter's undeniable combat prowess and tactical expertise. Those Minotaurs who do serve in the Watch report experiencing persistent suspicion from battle brothers of other chapters, warriors who should be united in common cause against humanity's enemies. Watch Fortress Iriok records note multiple instances of Minotaurs' kill team members being excluded from non-essential mission planning discussions, with other Astartes expressing concerns about operational security when the High Lord's hounds are present, as if their very presence represents a threat to be managed rather than an asset to be utilized. This isolation appears intentional rather than incidental to the chapter's purpose, a carefully maintained separation that serves the High Lord's needs. A force designed to enforce compliance among other Space Marines cannot afford the fraternal bonds that might stay their hand when orders demand action against brother Astartes. The Minotaurs' uncertain genetic lineage, their deeply secretive practices, and their direct Terran oversight all serve to maintain this crucial separation, ensuring their continued effectiveness as the High Lord's executioners regardless of the target's identity or past service. The chapter's role becomes particularly significant during periods of political transition within the Senatorum Imperialis, when the balance of power shifts and ambitious High Lords vie for greater influence. Following Lord Commander Militant Vidinus Dahl's unexpected death in the year 876 of the 41st millennium, 3 Minotaurs strike cruisers established orbit around Terra itself, a deployment location normally absolutely prohibited to Astartes vessels, except under the most extraordinary circumstances. They remained in position throughout the contentious selection of Dahl's successor, their presence serving as a visible reminder of the consequences should political maneuvering exceed acceptable boundaries or threaten the stability of imperial governance. While the Minotaurs' privileged status grants them extraordinary operational latitude and access to resources other chapters can only dream of acquiring, it also imposes significant constraints on their autonomy that effectively bind them to Terra's will. Unlike chapters that might choose to focus on particular threats based on their own strategic assessments, pursuing enemies across the galaxy according to their own priorities and traditions, the Minotaurs operate almost exclusively at the High Lord's direct direction. Analysis of their deployment patterns reveals remarkably few instances of independent action, with nearly all documented operations correlating directly to specific directives issued from Terra's halls of power. This control extends even to their recruitment practices, one of the most sacred traditions of any Astartes chapter. Where most chapters maintain traditional ties to specific worlds or regions from which they draw aspirants, often worlds they have protected for millennia, and whose people view service in the chapter as the highest honor, the Minotaurs appear to receive regular transfers of pre-screened candidates delivered directly to the Didilos Crata by unmarked transport vessels. Janitors from the Adeptus Mechanicus accompany these mysterious shipments, their presence suggesting a level of oversight in the chapter's gene seed implementation that exceeds standard Astartes protocols and implies external supervision of even this most fundamental chapter function. The Minotaurs' arrival in the Maelstrom Zone during the Badab War represented one of the most decisive and controversial deployments of Astartes' forces in that tragic conflict, a war that would see brother fighting brother in the Imperium's name. Unlike many loyalist chapters who entered the theater with profound reluctance and heavy hearts, the Minotaurs translated into the Badab sector in 997 with unmistakable purpose and cold efficiency that suggested they had been waiting for precisely this opportunity. Their fleet, comprising the battle barge Didilos Crata, 2 strike cruisers designated Lord of Wrath and Stone Fellows, and 6 escort vessels, arrived without prior communication to other Imperial forces already engaged in the grinding war against their secessionist brothers. Lord Commander Kareb Kuln of the Red Scorpions, serving as overall commander of the Loyalist Astartes contingent and struggling to coordinate the complex multi-chapter operation, received only a terse astropathic message 12 hours before the Minotaurs' arrival. The message contained deployment coordinates and combat readiness status, but offered no strategic input requests or command integration protocols typically observed when Astartes forces join ongoing operations, as if the Minotaurs considered themselves answerable to no one present in the war zone. This unilateral approach immediately created tension with the existing command structure, particularly with the Fire Hawks and Marines errant chapters who had suffered horrific casualties, establishing the initial Imperial foothold in the region, while the Minotaurs remained conspicuously absent. The Minotaurs' deployment pattern revealed their operational priorities from the very outset, priorities that appeared predetermined rather than tactically responsive to the evolving situation. Rather than reinforcing existing Imperial positions or targeting the most strategically valuable secessionist holdings that might break the back of the rebellion, they directed their full attention toward the Lamentor's chapter with singular focus. This targeting priority appeared to have been established long before their arrival, suggesting specific directives from Terra regarding which secessionist forces warranted their specialized attention and which could be left to conventional loyalist forces. Asterion Malak established his command post aboard the Didilos Crata rather than at the loyalist headquarters on Sagan, further emphasizing the chapter's operational independence and separation from other Imperial forces. From this mobile command center, suspended in the void above the war-torn region, he orchestrated a systematic campaign against the Lamentor's void assets, with a precision that demonstrated extensive pre-mission intelligence gathering. The Minotaurs possessed detailed knowledge of Lamentor's fleet movements, patrol patterns, and even communication protocols, information that other Loyalist forces had struggled to obtain despite months of prior engagement and sustained intelligence operations. The Void War against the cursed Lamentors began with a precisely coordinated ambush near the Val asteroid belt, a killing zone that the Minotaurs had clearly identified through careful analysis. 3 Minotaurs strike cruisers, operating with active auger systems dampened to minimal output to avoid detection, positioned themselves along projected patrol routes of Lamentor's escort vessels. When the Lamentor's frigates Mater Suspirorum and Daughter of Tempests entered the designated engagement zone, following their standard patrol pattern, the Minotaurs executed a synchronized attack that crippled both vessels before they could transmit distress signals or maneuver to defensive positions. The precision of this operation suggested not merely tactical excellence, but intimate familiarity with Lamentor's Void doctrine, developed through extensive study, or perhaps even infiltration. Following this devastating initial success, the Minotaurs implemented what naval tacticians would later term a constriction pattern around Lamentor's controlled space, a methodical strategy of strangulation rather than direct confrontation. Rather than engaging in direct fleet actions against numerically superior forces where casualties might prove unacceptably high, they conducted carefully targeted raids against supply vessels, communication relays, and isolated warships. Each operation further restricted the Lamentor's operational sphere while minimizing Minotaur's casualties, demonstrating a patience and methodical approach that stood in stark contrast to their reputation for overwhelming aggression. Within 17 days of their arrival in the war zone, they had effectively reduced the Lamentor's patrol zone by 60% without committing to a single large-scale fleet engagement, slowly tightening the noose around their doomed prey. This methodical approach forced the Lamentors into an increasingly untenable strategic position, where their options narrowed with each passing day. As their supply lines contracted and communication with outlying positions became increasingly fragmented and unreliable, Chapter Master Malachim Foros faced an impossible choice between concentrating his fleet for mutual protection, abandoning his strategic objectives in the process, or maintaining those objectives while leaving his vessels vulnerable to the predatory Minotaurs. When he ultimately made the painful decision to consolidate his remaining vessels around the Lamentor's flagship Mater Lacrimarum for a desperate last stand, he unknowingly seized precisely the opportunity the Minotaurs had methodically created through weeks of patient maneuvering. The assault on the Mater Lacrimarum stands as one of the most clinically executed boarding actions in recorded Imperial naval history, a masterpiece of violence that would be studied in tactical academies for centuries to come, had it not been suppressed. The Minotaurs committed 12 Ceastus assault rams and 28 Thunderhawk gunships in the initial wave, each craft assigned specific entry points based on detailed schematics of the Lamentor's vessel that should have been impossible for them to acquire. Unlike conventional boarding operations that typically focus on command decks and engine compartments in straightforward attempts to seize control, the Minotaurs targeted the ship's chapter shrine, apothecarian, and gene seed storage facilities with priority designation that revealed their true objectives. Terminator-armored veterans of the Minotaur's first company, led by Asterian Malach himself wielding his fearsome relic glaive black spear, spearheaded the brutal assault on the ship's reclusiam. Surviving Lamentor's accounts describe the chapter master as an unstoppable force of nature, his ancient glaive cutting through Terminator-armored Lamentors with horrifying efficiency that seemed impossible even for an Astartes warrior. A Lamentor's chaplain who witnessed the assault and barely survived to tell of it noted that Malach moved with mechanical precision rather than battle fury, each stroke calculated to maximize lethality against Astartes' physiology, suggesting years of specialized training in anti-space marine combat techniques that went far beyond standard Astartes martial instruction. While Malak's assault team engaged the ship's desperate defenders in close-quarters combat that turned corridors into charnel houses, specialized Minotaurs extraction teams breached the vessel's apothecarian complex with ruthless efficiency. These squads, equipped with specialized melta-charges designed to breach ceramic-reinforced vault doors without damaging the precious contents within, systematically secured the Lamentor's gene seed reserves, chapter relics spanning centuries of service, and ancient technological artifacts. Each item was cataloged with remarkable efficiency and attention to detail before being transferred to designated extraction craft, suggesting a pre-planned acquisition protocol rather than opportunistic battlefield looting. The defense mounted by the Lamentors proved valiant but ultimately futile against the Minotaur's specialized assault tactics, warriors prepared specifically for this moment. The doomed chapter had trained extensively for void combat against conventional enemies, human rebels, Xenos forces, even Chaos warbands, but found themselves desperately unprepared for an enemy that understood Astartes' defensive protocols as thoroughly as they did themselves. Minotaurs' boarding teams breached compartments through maintenance shafts deemed too narrow for Astartes' passage according to standard tactical doctrine, employed jamming frequencies that specifically disrupted space marine helmet vox patterns, and utilized specialized breaching charges calibrated to penetrate the exact thickness of internal bulkheads standard on Astartes vessels. Within 7 hours of the assault's commencement, as the Lamentor's resistance crumbled section by section, the Minotaurs had secured control of 80% of the Mater Lacrimarum, including all critical systems and the chapter's most sacred repositories. The cost proved substantial for both sides in this fratricidal slaughter. The Minotaurs lost 78 battle brothers in the engagement, a significant price even for them, while the Lamentors suffered approximately 120 casualties, including their Master of Sanctity and Chief Apothecary. More devastating than these combat losses, however, was the seizure of nearly 70% of the Lamentors' stored gene seed, the genetic legacy of their chapter stretching back to their founding, crippling their ability to rebuild their numbers after the conflict and effectively sentencing the chapter to a slow death. The methodical precision of the operation continued as the Minotaurs secured their prizes with the same efficiency they had demonstrated throughout the assault. Each captured gene seed container was carefully transferred to specialized stasis units aboard designated Minotaurs vessels, accompanied by apothecaries maintaining strict contamination protocols, as if handling the most precious cargo in the galaxy. Chapter relics, including the Lamentor's sacred standard Banner of Tears and the ancient power sword Glaive of Sorrow, both artifacts dating back to the chapter's founding, were catalogued meticulously and secured in magnetically sealed reliquaries. Even Dhamma Jed items received careful preservation treatment, suggesting these artifacts were considered evidence to be preserved and studied rather than merely battlefield trophies. Throughout the entire operation, Minotaur's command maintained comprehensive documentation of all seized materials with thoroughness that seemed obsessive. Pick captures taken during the boarding action show Minotaur's officers recording serial designations from weapon systems, taking material samples from damaged equipment for later analysis, and creating detailed inventories of ammunition types found in Lamentor's armories. This level of documentation exceeded standard battlefield salvage procedures by orders of magnitude, resembling instead the evidential preservation techniques employed by inquisitorial investigation teams building cases against suspected heretics. The aftermath of the Mater Lacrimarum assault effectively ended the Lamentor's meaningful participation in the Badab War, their spine broken by this systematic devastation. With their flagship captured, gene seed reserves depleted to catastrophic levels, and command structure decimated, Chapter Master Foros had no choice but to signal his surrender to Loyalist forces, bowing to the inevitable rather than seeing his chapter annihilated entirely. The terms imposed upon the surviving Lamenters proved harsh, but stopped just short of the complete chapter extinction that many expected and perhaps some desired. They were sentenced to a 100-year penitent crusade on the eastern fringe, forbidden from recruiting new members until this sentence was completed, a punishment that left them perpetually undermanned and teetering on the edge of extinction for a century. With the Lamenters neutralized as a fighting force, the Minotaurs shifted their attention to the remaining secessionist forces, though with noticeably less focus and intensity than they had displayed against their primary target. Their operations against the Mantis Warriors and Executioners chapters followed more conventional Astartes engagement protocols, rather than the specialized anti-Astartes techniques employed so devastatingly against the Lamenters. This operational shift further supports theories that the Minotaurs had entered the conflict with highly specific directives from Terra regarding priority targets, with the Lamenters marked for special attention for reasons that remain unclear. The Minotaurs' approach to war material seizure from these other secessionist chapters proved equally revealing in its differences. While they claimed considerable salvage from Mantis Warriors and Executioners vessels through right of conquest as was their due, these acquisitions lacked the methodical documentation and specialized handling observed during the Lamenters' operations. Equipment was evaluated primarily for immediate combat utility rather than evidential value, with functional weapons and armor redistributed to Minotaurs' armories according to standard battlefield salvage protocols, rather than treated as precious specimens to be preserved and studied. The chapter's behavior during the final phases of the Badab War demonstrated yet again their unique position within the Imperial command structure and their true masters. When Lord Commander Kulm convened a strategic council to plan the final assault on Badab Primaris itself, the culmination of years of grinding warfare, Asterion Malak attended but offered minimal tactical input, sitting in brooding silence. Instead, he informed the assembled commanders that the Minotaurs would be withdrawing the majority of their forces from the theater, their primary objectives already accomplished. This unilateral decision, made without consultation with the overall Imperial command, and in direct contradiction to established military protocol, would have been considered unacceptable insubordination from any other chapter. The Minotaurs departed the Badab sector in early 912, their holds laden with an extensive haul of captured material and biological samples. Their fleet translated into the warp without formal departure protocols or courtesy notifications, leaving only a single strike cruiser to represent their interests during the final pacification of the region. This abrupt withdrawal occurred precisely as the focus of the conflict shifted from Astartes versus Astartes engagements to the purging of chaos influence from Badab Primaris, further evidence that their mission parameters centered specifically on neutralizing renegade space marines, rather than addressing the broader strategic objectives of the campaign against the forces of the ruinous powers. Post-conflict analysis by Ordo Hereticus investigators, conducted once the fires of war had finally dimmed, revealed the true extent of the Minotaurs' acquisitions during their Badab War deployment. Beyond the expected tally of weapons, vehicles, and standard military equipment, they had secured extensive biological samples from fallen secessionist Astartes, detailed Vox logs of Lamenters' command communications that might reveal tactical patterns and command philosophies, and complete technical schematics of Lamenters' fleet assets. Most significantly, they had obtained intact standard template construct fragments from the Lamenters' Tech Marines archives relating to specialized life support systems designed for Astartes physiology, technology with potential applications for addressing gene seed degradation issues that might prove invaluable to Terra's continued oversight of the Adeptus Astartes. The final inventory of seized chapter relics proved particularly extensive and troubling to those who reviewed the reports. From the Lamenters alone, the Minotaurs acquired 17 artifacts designated as items of significant chapter heritage, including 3 dating back to the Great Crusade era itself. These included the Chalice of Bitter Mercy, a pre-heresy artifact allegedly used in the earliest gene seed implantation rituals of the chapter's founding, and the Scrolls of Lamentations containing the earliest recorded history of the chapter, including details of their founding that had never been shared with Imperial authorities, secrets the Lamenters had guarded for millennia now laid bare. The strategic impact of the Minotaurs' intervention in the Badab War extended far beyond the immediate military outcomes and casualty figures. Their systematic dismantling of the Lamenters chapter served as a powerful and terrifying demonstration of the consequences awaiting Astartes' forces who defied Imperial authority, regardless of their motivations or past loyalties to the Golden Throne. The methodical seizure of gene seed reserves sent a particularly chilling message throughout the Adeptus Astartes that even the most sacred aspects of their existence, the genetic legacy passed down through generations of service, remained subject to Imperial seizure should they step beyond acceptable boundaries of autonomy. From their distinctive bronze armor to their fearsome iconography, the Minotaur's visual identity stands among the most immediately recognizable and deliberately intimidating in the Adeptus Astartes. Their primary armor coloration, a burnished bronze that gleams with metallic luster even under the harsh conditions of active battlefields, represents a deliberate aesthetic choice that serves both symbolic and practical purposes. This bronze base provides exceptional durability against corrosive environments encountered on death worlds and industrial war zones, while offering moderate light absorption properties that balance battlefield visibility with tactical stealth considerations in certain operational environments. The bronze coloration connects directly and unmistakably to the chapter's namesake, evoking the ancient Terran myth of the bronze bull constructed to house the fearsome Minotaur of legend, that half-man, half-beast creature that haunted the labyrinth of Knossos in pre-Imperial mythology. This reference to ancient Earth mythology appears entirely deliberate rather than coincidental, as numerous other elements of the chapter's elaborate heraldry draw from the same cultural wellspring. Tech Marines within the chapter maintain this distinctive metallic finish through a complex application process involving actual bronze compounds rather than simple pigments, creating armor that functionally incorporates bronze elements within its ceramite structure for enhanced durability. Complementing this striking bronze base are secondary colors of deep crimson and matte black, applied to specific armor components in patterns that follow practical battlefield logic rather than purely aesthetic considerations. Shoulder pad rims, knee guards, and arm joints typically receive the crimson treatment, marking potential weak points in the armor while simultaneously creating visual disruption patterns that complicate enemy targeting systems. The black components, most notably applied to power pack housings, ammunition pouches, and sensor arrays, reduce the reflectivity of operational equipment that might otherwise compromise stealth operations during night fighting or void warfare. The symbolism of these color choices extends beyond mere tactical considerations into the realm of psychological warfare. The crimson elements evoke the blood sacrifices associated with the ancient Minotaur myth, rivers of gore flowing through ancient stone passages, while the black components represent the suffocating darkness of the labyrinth in which the creature dwelled according to legend. Together with the bronze primary color, this scheme creates a visual narrative that reinforces the chapter's identity as hunters who thrive in confined spaces, emerging from darkness to strike with lethal precision before vanishing once more. Armor markings follow a system that superficially resembles Codex Astartes standards, but incorporates significant deviations reflecting the chapter's unique organizational structure and operational focus. Company designations appear as stylized numerals rendered in black upon the right shoulder pad, surrounded by intricate geometric patterns resembling ancient Terran labyrinth designs that grow more complex with a warrior's experience. These labyrinthine borders increase in intricacy with the Battle Brothers service record, with veterans displaying patterns so elaborate that even fellow Astartes might spend years fully deciphering their meaning. Squad designations manifest not through standard codex numerical systems, but via stylized bull icons in varying poses, each representing specific tactical roles within the chapter's structure. Assault specialists bear the charging bull with head lowered and horns prominent, ready to gore its enemies. Tactical squads display the vigilant bull with head raised and alert for danger. Devastator teams carry the image of the planted bull with stance wide and immovable as a fortress wall. These icons appear on the left knee plate rather than the standard shoulder position, making them clearly visible to squad members during close formation operations in the confined environments where the Minotaurs excel. The chapter's primary iconography, the stylized bull's head that marks them as Minotaurs, has evolved significantly since their earliest recorded appearances in Imperial service. Ancient pick captures from the 32nd millennium show a relatively simplistic bull silhouette rendered in red upon their earlier rust-colored armor, crude and tribal in its execution. The modern iteration displays dramatically increased sophistication, featuring a stylized bull's head rendered in stark black with burning red eyes, incorporating subtle anatomical details that suggest an actual death mask taken from some mighty beast rather than merely a symbolic representation. This primary icon appears most prominently on the left shoulder pauldron, rendered in stark black against the bronze background, with the distinctive red eyes serving as focal points that seem to track observers with unsettling intensity. The design incorporates subtle asymmetry, with the right horn extending slightly longer than the left. A feature that chapter artificers maintain represents the unpredictability and controlled chaos of the chapter in combat. Veteran members earn the right to add personalized embellishments to their shoulder iconography, typically in the form of additional geometric patterns surrounding the bull motif that record significant campaigns fought or notable kills achieved in service to Terra. Beyond these standardized elements that create visual unit cohesion, the Minotaurs display an unusual degree of individualization in their armor embellishments compared to more rigid codex-adherent chapters. Unlike chapters that maintain strict uniformity in appearance, treating any deviation as borderline heretical, Minotaurs' battle brothers are not merely permitted, but actively encouraged to modify their armor with trophies and decorative elements that reflect their personal combat experiences. These additions typically incorporate bovine motifs in various forms, vertebrae carved into grip sections of weapons, horn fragments inlaid into knife handles, and skull fragments embedded in shoulder pauldrons as grim reminders of battles won and enemies slain. The most distinctive feature of Minotaur's armor modifications appears in their helmet designs, which have become icons of terror across battlefields throughout the Imperium. While basic tactical helmets follow standard Mark VII or Mark VIII patterns for functionality, veterans frequently modify their helmets extensively to incorporate stylized bull horns or crest extensions. These modifications serve both ceremonial and grimly practical purposes. The reinforced horns can function as close-quarters weapons in extreme situations when ammunition runs dry or power packs fail, while simultaneously creating an imposing psychological effect on enemies that can break morale before the first shot is fired. The chapter's most veteran members, those who have served for centuries and witnessed countless campaigns, often display helmets completely redesigned to resemble snarling bull heads, with respirator grills modified to resemble flared nostrils and eye lenses tinted deep crimson like drops of fresh blood. Asterian Moloch's personal heraldry represents the absolute pinnacle of this fearsome aesthetic. His ancient Tartaros pattern Terminator armor, a relic even by the standards of relic equipment, has been extensively modified with layered bronze plating over its ceramic components, creating multiple protective layers. The bull motif reaches its most extreme and disturbing expression in his helmet design, which abandons standard Terminator helmet architecture entirely in favor of a complete bull's head rendition, featuring elongated horns and multiple red-eye lenses arranged, to create an unsettling, inhuman appearance that has haunted the nightmares of those who survive encounters with him. The overall aesthetic effect creates an imposing silhouette that combines ancient Terran mythological references with transhuman intimidation factors calculated to inspire terror. The chapter's officers display rank through subtle variations in their armor decoration, rather than through standardized insignia that might make them targets. Company captains incorporate silver detailing along their helmet crests and pauldron edges, while chaplains replace the standard skull helmet worn by their counterparts in other chapters, with a bronze bull skull design unique to the Minotaurs that transforms them into avatars of ancient wrath. Apothecaries maintain the traditional white arm gauntlet that marks their sacred calling, but add bronze studs along its length, with each stud reportedly representing 100 gene seed collections performed under active combat conditions. The Minotaurs' preference for close-quarters combat manifests clearly in their weapons' aesthetics and modifications. Their close combat weapons, particularly the power axes and thunder hammers they favor, feature oversized proportions compared to those of other chapters, with heavier striking heads and reinforced hafts designed for maximum impact force. Power weapon energy fields are typically calibrated to produce a distinctive amber glow, rather than the blue or white manifestations common among other chapters, creating a visual effect reminiscent of heated bronze, when activated, that marks their wielders as Minotaurs even in the chaos of melee combat. Bolters and other ranged weapons receive similar treatment designed to maximize their effectiveness in the chapter's preferred engagement ranges. Standard patterns are modified to incorporate additional weight in the stock and barrel assemblies, modifications that reduce maximum effective range by approximately 7 to 12% compared to standard patterns, but significantly increase stopping power and penetration capabilities at close to medium ranges, where most of their combat occurs. Ammunition feeds are frequently upgraded with high-capacity systems, allowing sustained fire, reflecting the chapter's tactical preference for overwhelming firepower in confined environments where resupply may prove difficult or impossible. The labyrinthine motif that defines so much of their identity appears consistently throughout these weapon modifications as well. Bolter casings feature etched maze patterns that serve dual purposes as both grip enhancement for armored gauntlets and devotional scripture praising Terra's authority. Combat knives incorporate serration patterns based on ancient labyrinth designs rather than standard tactical patterns optimized purely for cutting efficiency. Even ammunition is not exempt from this obsessive aesthetic treatment. Bolt shells recovered from Minotaurs' operations often bear microscopically small maze patterns etched into their brass casings, visible only under significant magnification, but present nonetheless, as if every aspect of their wargear must bear witness to their identity. Perhaps the most distinctive element of Minotaurs' equipment appears in their unique approach to Terminator armor deployment and customization. The chapter maintains an unusually large complement of these revered suits, with estimates suggesting between 7,100 operational suits compared to the 30 to 40 typical of a Codex-compliant chapter. More significantly, these suits incorporate extensive modifications collectively known as the Aegis pattern that distinguish them dramatically from standard Indomitus or Tartaros configurations used by other chapters. The Aegis pattern modifications focus on three primary functional areas designed to enhance their battlefield effectiveness: Additional frontal armor plating provides increased protection against direct frontal assaults. Enhanced power distribution systems allow sustained operation of energy-intensive equipment, and specialized close-quarters combat attachments optimize them for the confined space warfare that defines Minotaurs' operations. The frontal reinforcement, consisting of overlapping bronze plates secured to the standard ceramic chest housing, provides approximately 23% increased protection against direct attacks at the cost of somewhat reduced lateral mobility, a trade-off the chapter considers more than acceptable given their operational focus. Power distribution enhancements incorporate additional capacitors throughout the suit systems, allowing for sustained, simultaneous operation of energy-intensive systems like power weapons and teleportation homers without the typical performance degradation that limits other Terminator suits. Most visibly, Aegis pattern Terminator suits feature distinctive helmet modifications that incorporate sensor arrays typically reserved foe. Are specialized assault units. These arrays, appearing as elongated horns extending from the standard helmet design in ways that echo the chapter's iconography, provide significantly enhanced awareness in Zone Mortali's environments, particularly in detecting movement through solid barriers and around corners where standard sensors prove inadequate. Combined with integrated Auspex systems specifically calibrated for detecting other Astartes through their unique biosigns and power armor emissions, these modifications create Terminator units uniquely optimized for anti-space marine operations. The artificer work displayed on these ancient suits reveals a distinctive stylistic approach that sets Minotaurs' artisans apart from their counterparts in other chapters. Where Ultramarines' artificers favor clean lines and classical proportions, reflecting their Primarch's appreciation for aesthetic perfection, and Blood Angels emphasize artistic beauty in their modifications, as befits sons of Sanguinius. Minotaurs' artificers prioritize brutal functionality, enhanced by deliberately intimidating aesthetic choices that sacrifice elegance for psychological impact. This philosophy extends throughout their arsenal to the chapter's dreadnoughts, those honored war machines that house the remains of fallen heroes. These ancient warriors display some of the most extensive modifications seen among Loyalist chapters, with the Minotaurs maintaining approximately 20 operational dreadnoughts, an unusually high number that includes several ancient patterns rarely seen in active service across the Imperium. Their Contemptor dreadnoughts in particular feature extensive bronze plating over standard ceramic components, with helmet housings modified to resemble snarling bull heads, complete with functional metallic horn protrusions that can serve as devastating close combat weapons. Throughout their fleet and armories, the Minotaurs have crafted an identity that is at once ancient and terrible, evoking myths from before the Age of Strife, while serving the cold political necessities of the present age. They are the bronze bull incarnate, an instrument of Terra's will wrapped in the trappings of legend, their every weapon and armor plate proclaiming their purpose as executioners of the High Lord's judgment. And in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, that judgment falls with ever-increasing frequency upon those who dare to question the Imperium's authority, regardless of the righteousness of their cause or the purity of their loyalty to the Golden Throne.